Thanks, Tracy. Well,
We just got a bit of mute.
Yeah, is that because we're not on mute?
Yeah, somebody's not on mute somewhere.
Okay. So if we could all just go on to mute, that'd be great. Okay, we're good to go.
We've had people join now from the public. Can we ask people to all go on mute? There's somebody's obviously driving that is not on mute yet. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. If we could just ask everybody, other than myself, if you'd mind muting your microphone. David, if you could, thank you. If you do that, just make the sound quality work as we want it to. So good afternoon. It's almost good evening, isn't it? Welcome to everybody for the first annual general meeting of Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Integrated Care Board. It's great that we've been joined by so many members of the general public and other colleagues to be with us this evening. My name's David Pearson. I'm chair of the Integrated Care Board and co-chair of the Integrated Care Partnership for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. And what I want to do is, if I could just set a bit of the background. Again, if colleagues could just go on to mute, it'll improve the sound quality. So tonight's or this afternoon's proceedings is the AGM it's in two parts really. It's the past 6 CCG's AGM from April 22 to June 22, and for the ICB AGM from July 22 to March 23. And that's the period we're covering in our presentations to you this afternoon. All NHS organisations must publish annual reports and accounts to allow scrutiny of the year's operations, finances and outcomes. And we're presenting them today at our annual general meeting to provide people with the opportunity to raise any questions with any member of the board during the proceedings. I just want to note that due to a by-election in Tamworth, we may need to observe pre-election rules this afternoon. Therefore, there may be some questions that we will struggle to answer because of that at this time. But if that is the case, we will endeavour to make sure that those questions are answered at the appropriate time in writing. So if we could just have the etiquette slide up, please, Dan. So what I'd just ask of everybody on the call this afternoon, if all cameras could be off except the chair or those who are presenting items on the agenda, it'll improve the quality of the meeting. Can you make sure your microphone is on mute during the meeting unless you are asking a question? Because again, it will have an impact on the sound quality. Questions that we've had submitted via email in advance of the meeting will be addressed by myself and the team during the question and answer session. And when we get to that session, please raise your hand on Teams if you'd like to ask a question live during the session on the agenda, and I'll make sure that you're brought into that to ask that question. So Dan, if we just take the next slide. So we have a leadership compact to ensure that we consistently act according to our values. And as you can see on the screen, this is how we hold ourselves accountable to allow for the continued improvements in how we operate and the culture in which we operate. And you'll see there that that covers the domains of trust, courage, openness and honesty, leading by example, looking forward, system first, kindness and compassion, and respect for everybody and everybody's contribution to the meeting. So what I'd like to do, we just move into the next slide. We've got the agenda here, which I hope has been circulated. So we'll do the welcome and introductions. I'll just do a few statements on some key things in a moment. And then we will move into the annual reports and accounts, and they'll be presented in turn by key members of the executive team. And then we're going to have a video which will highlight the voluntary community social enterprise sector's contribution to our working. And then we'll have an integrated care partnership update, and then move into the question and answer session to give everybody on the call the opportunity of raising those questions that I referred to earlier. So without further ado, if we could just move into the next slide. So I just wanted to pick out a number of key things before we move into the detailed presentations that you're going to receive in a moment. And just the first one, development of the Integrated Care Board. You'll be aware we are a new organisation, just over 12 months old. And during that time, we've worked hard to build on the legacy structures from the CCGs to ensure that our systems and processes are effective and enable our staff to be fully focused on delivering for our population. During the period of change, all statutory functions were delivered, but we are developing, we're reflective, and obviously very forward-looking. And you'll hear as we go through tonight's presentations about how we are taking a number of initiatives forward to enable the organisation to mature at pace. It was pleasing to note that we were nominated through the Health Service Journal for ICS of the Year. Good to be nominated. On this occasion, we didn't win that, but it was great to be in the pack in terms of being recognised for the work that had been done in a very short period of time. We need to still recognise the continued impact of COVID-19. While we've been fortunate that the number of people contracting the virus has reduced, we must remember that it's not gone away. And some of the members of the team tonight have been suffering recently with recent manifestations of the virus. In December 22, we experienced some of the longest delays for ambulance and emergency department waiting times in the country at the University Hospital of North Midlands NHS Trust, and we learned a great deal from that. The winter pressures were very real, very difficult, and lasted for a long period. And we've spent a lot of time preparing for this winter, which we're expecting again to be very challenging. But we've had the benefit of learning from that process 12 months ago. And I referred to the video that you'll see on the agenda this evening to do with the establishment of the Voluntary Community Social Enterprise Alliance. And that alliance is the recognised governance structure through which all elements of the system will agree liaison and engagement with the VCSE sector to actually enable them to play their major part as a key stakeholder in our system across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. So what I'd now like to do is to hand over to Peter Axon, our Chief Executive, who will introduce the team as we go through and take us through various elements of the presentation. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, David. I thought it would be worthwhile beginning with a description of how we've formed ourselves, if you like, over the last year or so. So the journey began back in the summer of 2022 when we moved to what I would describe as a clinical portfolio structure. So that required a formal reorganisation of the ICB at that point in time, which was frankly a major undertaking, given the fact that it meant that the whole of the organisation needed to go through a formal process, having of course also at that point in time been through
Peter, you've gone on to mute. Peter, I don't know whether you can hear me. You're on mute.
Right. Is that, am I loud and clear?
Loud and clear again, Peter, thanks.
Thank goodness. Apologies. For some reason, my mouse wasn't working or isn't working. Yes, so we established ourselves, as I described a moment ago, across 7 portfolios, which I'll describe in more detail in a moment's time. But what we also felt was particularly important was to make sure that our portfolios aligned neatly with how we commission and how we deliver our services. So essentially, the commissioning focus shifted to our relationship with place, and in that regard, very much a focus on our relationship with local authorities and the upper tier local authorities and those boundaries, Stoke City and of course the county, are how we've aligned ourselves at that place level. But acknowledging fundamentally that ultimately success is predicated on delivering services, delivering improvement, delivering transformation. The provider collaborative agenda equally is hugely important. So in that regard, what we have focused on is what we kind of call our 3 Ps, and you can see there the 3 Ps: place, provider collaborative and portfolios, but making sure that through our portfolios, our 7 portfolios, we focus on population need. And as I said, in a second, I'll describe what those 7 portfolios are. But in doing that through our places and our relationships with local authorities and delivering in a collaborative way, fundamentally ICSs were and have been created to build that mutual accountability piece up, to move from a culture of competition to collaboration, and provider collaboratives are a great vehicle to achieve that, as of course is place in terms of that predominantly commissioning relationship across various agencies. So hopefully that explains a little bit about, as I say, the purpose behind why our portfolios were created, and we focused our organisational structure as an ICB on those portfolios, why place is critical from a relationship point of view with our fellow local authorities, and why provider collaboratives from a delivery perspective are also absolutely critical. But all of those elements, if you like, create an environment that to some extent is organisationally agnostic. So it breaks barriers down between those legal entities and gets us to work better together. I suppose fundamentally that's the purpose of all of those different structural changes and evolution. Okay, Dan, if we could move to the next slide, please. So yes, as I promised a moment ago, you can see in front of you the 7 portfolios that we have created. Hopefully you'll recognise the narrative, the titles in each of them, because essentially they're not new things in the NHS, but in ensuring that we focus our attention on these things, we feel that as I mentioned a moment ago, we're focusing on patient need, but we're also making sure that the patient journey in many regards is focused on in general terms. So urgent and emergency care as an overarching agenda, looking at it from that holistic perspective, as opposed to a siloed view of how patients are treated individually and separately within, say, University Hospital North Midlands, as compared to how they're treated in the community, looking at the whole patient journey. And of course, the interdependencies between the portfolios is key. So the impact that primary care, and particularly improving population health, which is very much around preventative and proactive service development, the impact that those services and portfolios have on the urgent and emergency care agenda is absolutely critical. So I suppose what I would say is this isn't to look at the portfolios that we've created in isolation, individually in isolation. Yes, it's to focus on each of these agendas, but it's also to acknowledge that the relationships between each of those portfolios is critical. And just to finish on a key point, really, that particularly that improving population health portfolio for us is relatively new as a concept in terms of the various things that it pulls together in one place. But going forward, you know, it's absolutely critical that we make sure that that agenda is front and centre, as many have described it in the past, the split lens of being able to deliver services in the here and now, the reactive service agenda, as well as we can, but fundamentally concentrating, you know, a good chunk, half of our time on that proactive and preventative service offer and support for the population. I'll finish there. I think that was my last slide, David, and I think I'm handing over to Chris Bird.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. Dan, if we could move the slides on, please. So apologies for the voice. I've got COVID at the moment, and it's obviously impacting on my throat. So I think I've got about 3 slides. The first of which really is just a scene setting slide to explain a little bit more about the background to place-based partnerships. So they were formalised through the Health and Social Care Act 2022, and there's approximately about 175 place-based partnerships across England, but they are different, and they are designed to suit the population they cover. So there's a degree of permissiveness within the design. There's certainly no one size fits all. And as Peter's kind of begun to explain, their purpose is to understand and respond to local need, to join up and coordinate services, and to impact the factors that influence health and well-being, particularly what we might call those wider determinants. So things like education, things like employment, things like housing, and the impact that they have on an individual's health and well-being, and the drivers then of demand into NHS and local authority services. And again, that's why concepts like population health management are so important in that regard. In terms of the policy environment, they have existed in different forms for many years. There are 2 national policy documents which we take our lead from: Thriving Places in 2021, and perhaps more importantly now, the Integration White Paper that was published in 2022. And they do set out slightly different national policy ambitions, but the common denominator is that they focus on what's called subsidiarity, so trying to bring decision making to the closest place that it impacts on the patients, the populations, the communities that it impacts. So if we just move on, please, Dan. Thank you. So as I say, the Integration White Paper is probably the national policy document that we focus more on these days, and it was in that context that we moved to what we call our 2-place model. We've had iterations of place-based partnerships in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent for several years now, but we moved formally to the 2-place model. So they are coterminous with our upper tier local authority partners. So we have a Stoke-on-Trent place and a Staffordshire place. They focus on integrated commissioning, but invite partners into that conversation so that the commissioning entities, the ICB and the local authority, are able to make those commissioning decisions in public, so they are informed by NHS provider and voluntary sector community colleagues to enable us basically to make better decisions. There are a number of priorities, as you can see there. So how do we make better decisions around care homes, around services for people with learning disabilities and autisms, for those people who are perhaps in receipt of services as a child but are beginning to prepare for adulthood, so children who are kind of between the ages of 14 and 18, people who may suffer from dementia, or people whose care may be arranged as part of what's called a Section 117 arrangement. We are working to better align the commissioning in 23-24, and as Peter says, the next evolution of place is to use population health management to advance what we're calling the neighbourhood concept. So being able to really drill down to individual communities, individual localities, and really understand the drivers of health and care need at that level, and therefore be able to again design much better, more tailored solutions and interventions to those drivers of demand. So if we can move on again, please, Dan. Thank you. So I think this is the last slide from me. So this now begins to talk more about provider collaboratives. We have a very well established programme. It's led by Tracy Bullock, who's the chief exec of University Hospitals North Midlands. We've got dedicated programme director resource in place. There is a national provider collaborative maturity matrix which we use, and there are also a number of well-established provider collaboratives that operate at a West Midlands regional level, and we draw on the experiences of those as well. We have several developed collaboratives across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. They cover things like children's asthma services, occupational health services, safeguarding responsibilities across partner organisations, and also things like shared care medicine arrangements across acute, community and primary care colleagues. The common denominator, as Peter suggested, is that they are a vehicle for system-wide collaboration or responding to a kind of large-scale service delivery or redesign challenges. Again, as with place, we'll be embedding population health management. We think that's going to accelerate and further develop our provider collaborative approach, and we are expanding the number of collaboratives, notably now to include NHS continuing healthcare. And we've made some really important strides in that regard over the past few weeks. I'll pause there. I think I'm handing over to another colleague at the end of my slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, David. So good afternoon. I'm Phil Smith, Chief Delivery Officer for the ICB. To give some context to this part of the agenda, the National Operational Planning Guidance for 22-23 really provided a clear focus for us in terms of ensuring that we were restoring our services post-COVID, that we were recovering elective activity backlogs, we were managing urgent care demand, in particular further instances of COVID, and delivering a whole raft of other key ambitions. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking through our approach, the challenges, and then some of the learning that we've had from the year. So for me, coming into post last year, it was really clear from the outset that success in this very, very complex environment with a number of moving parts would depend on us working together well as a system, doing things differently, and looking at new ways that we could improve our capacity and resilience in order to meet the delivery challenges that we were faced with. So to this end, the approach was really to build plans that had a focus on ensuring capacity was in the right place, ensuring that we had the workforce aligned to the priority areas, and ensuring that we had the right approach to escalation, so that when surges of demand did happen, we were able to respond to them. So in practical sense, for me, that kind of means a number of things. So firstly, it was really important that we had a shared view of what our demand in the system was, and therefore that any capacity plans that we were developing were built around that shared view. I think historically, perhaps different parts of the system had different views in terms of what was going to be happening, and therefore plans could be not as aligned. But by building a single system-owned demand model, we were able to coalesce our plans around that one place. Secondly, we implemented, in line with national guidance, we implemented a system control centre. It's now called a system coordination centre, but this came into being partway through the year, and essentially was looking at flow across the whole system with the view of managing it, managing demand, managing escalation, managing de-escalation, and ensuring that we were at all times targeting our resource most effectively to deliver the best care. That has been really, really successful, and actually we've been showcased regionally and nationally for the progress with that. So I'm really proud of that. Definitely, we developed prioritised plans that were focused on delivering the areas with greatest potential impact, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And really crucially for me, and you saw the leadership compact earlier on when David opened the meeting, actively using that to help us navigate through some very, very tricky times in the system. And as I've said already, having a really clear approach to learning it's been massively important. Can you just move us through a slide, please, Dan? Thank you. That's great. So whilst we did feel that we developed robust plans, the demand position was highly challenging at varying points of the year, with peak periods of pressure which were reflected all across the country. So I think it's worth just spending a minute looking at this. So as the big graph shows here, this is looking at flu cases, and the red line, I've purposely just stopped it at January to just show where that peak grew. So we had essentially an unprecedented level of flu demand, where it came far earlier and at a higher scale than previously. We also at the same time had surges in COVID and RSV demand. So to give some scale to that, in just a 2-week period, for example, we saw a 68% increase in the number of inpatients with COVID, 136% increase in the number of inpatients with flu, and over a 50% increase in the number of patients with RSV. So managing this is one example during the year, but managing these kind of surges can be really, really demanding, and it's therefore been really important that we've had the right approach to escalation, to risk share, and to balancing our priorities during the year. Can you just move us through a slide again, please, Dan, if that's okay? Thank you. So I talked a bit ago about the priorities for us, the areas of focus to allow us to manage that variation, and broadly it falls into these 3 blocks that are on screen, with an underpinning bar there looking at capacity and demand and ensuring that's aligned strategically, and all of the things we're doing link back to it. So firstly, we've called these pre-post and in hospital. However, terminology may be used differently in different places. Pre-hospital is essentially looking at any kind of escalation in the community and management of care in the community to prevent that escalation to a hospital setting, and an escalation to requiring ambulance conveyance, etc. So key part of this is looking at frail elderly patients, patients on end-of-life pathways, patients with long-term conditions, and ensuring that their treatment is managed and any escalations are managed in the community. To that end, we have our acute care at home offer, which brings together essentially a single point of access, response times within a couple of hours for community teams where people are escalating, and also we implemented virtual wards during the year to allow a greater number of people to be cared for outside of hospital. We've also got our focus around hospital flow, so ensuring that where people were conveyed to hospital, they were seen in a timely way, navigated and flowed through the hospital successfully. And then in terms of post-hospital, ensuring that we had timely care pathways in place for patients to be discharged into, optimising that discharge in a way that maximise long-term independence and re-ablement opportunities. And the last point there around discharge profile and targets, making sure that we've got consistency over the 7 days of the week, so that we're not artificially building up bottlenecks during the week and trying to smooth that variation as much as possible. I mentioned previously around lessons learned, and I really do feel that learning and reflection is absolutely crucial to the improvement journey. And one of the most valuable parts of the role for me over the year was the various learning events that we undertook, and the fact that we've used those events to inform the way we've delivered this year and the way that indeed we're planning for periods of surge as we head into the winter this year. So learning looked at a number of areas. So capacity, the demand, how effective was this model that we're all signed up to? Did we align workforce right? How did we manage escalation, de-escalation, particularly during periods where we entered into critical incident as a system, which were over the Christmas New Year period last year. And we've also had a very honest reflection, I think, against that leadership behavioural compact, and been able to challenge one another in periods where we didn't perhaps feel that was fully adhered to, and made sure that we learned from it. So we've also celebrated our successes as part of that, and I think going forwards that the key things that I brought into this year from those learning exercises were firstly, surge isn't just winter. We've now expanded to take a full year approach to demand and capacity, recommending that surges come at all times of the year. Notably, only a few weeks ago we were in a what was equivalent to January in terms of demand, but was related to heat rather than cold weather. We need to fully evaluate all of the schemes that we're doing and make sure we target our resources towards those that give us the greatest impact. And indeed, as we're looking at the financial context, which Paul will come on to shortly, looking at the value for money there, we need to ensure that we do more to manage and spread clinical risk in an equitable way across the pathway, and across all organisations. I mentioned system behaviours. The expansion of the system workforce hub has been absolutely key, and I think Mish will come on to talk about that in a little while. And the last part for me is around the greater involvement of the wider partners within the system, so voluntary care, and voluntary sector, other sectors, including fire and rescue and things, which have played a great deal, a great role for us, and are going to have a greater role indeed going forwards in terms of our system planning. So I will pause there, and I think I'm handing over to Paul to take us through the finance bit.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Phil. And same theme for me, really, in terms of system focus to money, as Phil's articulated there, with system focus to operations. I mean, we very much work now as a single system across the different organisations. I am today presenting the financial position, the accounts of the ICB, but the management of the position is something we do collectively across the organisations that we have within our system. The accounts themselves, which are obviously a fantastically interesting read for anybody who wants to read them, are available on the website in reference to those who attended the meeting, so they are there if you want to see them. I'm presenting those accounts to you today, and the annual report similarly a part of the pack that's been referenced in relation to this meeting here today. Just got 3 slides for you today. This first one shows how the ICB spend our money. As you can see, we spend 2.3 billion pounds. There are other elements of spend, something called specialist commissioning, some other services such as dentistry, which in this financial year were not part of the ICB, but they're all coming across to the ICB. So I'm presenting here the money that we spend. There's other money that is spent by NHS England. That will eventually come through the ICB, and as you can see down the bottom of this slide, the spending on services within the system on NHS care is actually over 3 billion, 3.3 billion. In terms of how we divide our spend, roughly half of it is on acute care, and of that half, about 85% of it is accounted for across 3 providers, the first being University Hospital North Midlands, who of course provide services from Stoke and Stafford. Secondly, University Hospital Derby Burton, who provide services to our eastern population in Burton. And then finally, Royal Wolverhampton Trust, who provide services to the southern part of our patch. That makes up, let's say, 85% of that, just over £1 billion. So that's by far and away the lion's share. There are effectively sort of 5 other big kind of buckets of how we spend our money, as set out in this slide. The first is on community healthcare services, mainly provided for us by Midlands Partnership University Foundation Trust. Then secondly, continuing healthcare, which is provided for us by many smaller providers, mainly, so nursing homes, etc. Thirdly, mental health services, that is provided for us by largely NHS North Staffs Combined and MPF UT. And then the next big element is prescribing, so that is medicines prescribed within primary care. And then the final chunk is primary care itself, so the spending on GPs and associated services. Then a few other bits and bobs that make up the balance. That hopefully gives you a flavour of how the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent pound is spent. This next slide provides a summary of how the accounts landed. If you just move on, please, Dan. So we had 2 parts to the year, because the clinical commissioning groups were still in existence until the end of June. So we did produce a rather mammoth 7 sets of accounts this year. So it was a bit of a big effort by the team to get that all done to time. So we had 3 months worth of accounts for the 6 CCGs. As you can see from this chart, all achieved exactly break even. That was because it was agreed by NHS Central that each CCG would basically, the allocations would match expenditure, but it's all scooped together into the full year. So effectively the meaningful number is the number on the right hand side, 0.48 million, so just under £500,000 surplus, so the right side of the line, which is the figure that went into the accounts of the Integrated Care Board. But as I say, that's just shy of £500,000 surplus applies across all those organisations. And we're pretty pleased with that when you're spending well over 2 billion to land on that sort of number is pretty good, pretty tricky. And we, I guess, put as much store behind making sure that we do spend the money as that we don't spend too much. And it's just trying to be just the right side of the line is where we always aim. As you can see here, we're very pleased to say that we got that spot on, and we were able to therefore to produce a balanced set of accounts. And I said at the start that the key way that we work now is as a system, and this is an AGM, as I said at the start, for the ICB, but our provider colleagues all also achieved a break even. We managed that position together effectively, and over the course of the year, going back not that long, many members of the public I'm sure will remember the days of argument and dispute. So we've put all that behind us, and now we really effectively work as one overall control total. We work together and we help each other manage the position, which is obviously great for patients and does give more chance to make sure that we collectively get it right. Moving on then to my last slide, this just sets out some of the challenges that we face, and it. Those who attended the board meeting that was this afternoon will have heard me talk about the in-year position, which is that we are adrift of the break-even plan. So we did set a break-even plan, and we were determined to do our best to try and achieve a break-even plan. that is our statutory duty to spend what we get and no more, and that was what we wanted to do. We had flagged to regulators, to NHS England, for several months that we were going to face a bit of an uphill struggle in order to do that. So we were quite clear going into 23-24 that it was going to be really, really difficult, and the overall allocation for the NHS was basically flat, no growth, but no reduction. But when you look at the the cost pressures that we experience, just the cost pressures of standing still are absolutely immense, as we have an increasing population here in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent and an increasingly aged population. Those two factors mean there's more and more demand for healthcare, not to mention the advances of medical science. So holding costs flat was always going to be really, really difficult. But we've had the added impact of inflation, which for us has been a very material impact, about 50 million of inflationary costs that we've experienced that were over and above the funding allocation that we received. So those things put together in a very difficult start position with a high levels of inflation that led to a position where we do not think that we will be able to break even. We are going through a process of discussing that with regulators. We are required to break even. That is our statutory duty, as I said. But we don't think we can achieve that as things currently stand. So that being so, our approach is to look at recovery. And on this, I think it's a really positive story. And again, we had the conversation at the board for those who were there. Our recovery plan, although I am facilitating it, it is not a recovery plan in the sense of reducing spend. Ultimately, we need to spend the money that we have, but it is a recovery plan centered on the patient. And as a system, we have very significantly, we spend significantly more on continuing healthcare than other systems. And the analysis that we've undertaken has shown that this is not providing better care, it's just providing more expensive care. And in fact, in many cases, what patients want, what we all want for ourselves and for our loved ones, is to get home as soon as we possibly can. I mean, who wants to be in hospital eating the hospital food? We all want to be treated at home, and the strategy is to do that, to help more and more patients receive their care at home. And if that's the case, then the intensive, very high cost CHC packages are not always required. And in some cases, they absolutely are. And we had a challenge from one of our non-executives in a board meeting saying to check that we are still following the regulations on eligibility around CHC, and we absolutely saying yes to that. Where a patient is eligible for CHC, they will receive it. The point is, not all patients need highly intensive packages of care. What they need is care at home, which is significantly less expensive. And we heard today from Neil Carr, Chief Executive of MP UFT, got that wrong way around, didn't I? MP UFT, yes, I've got it right, who is heading up the provider collaborative around CHC, and that is bringing together all providers, including partners in UHDB, for example, together to work together on the whole pathway for the patient. So from the point that the patient, we all start our journeys in primary care, through primary care into hospital care where that's required, into community care where that's required, and then ultimately for some people into continuing care, but really working together to try and ensure that wherever possible, patients who if don't come into the pathway in the first, or don't come into the acute sector in the first place, and Phil was talking about virtual wards, fantastic initiative, but where patients do come into the acute pathway, to effectively try and fix people so that they are fully mobile and fully able to be independent. That is the goal, and the way to do that is through bringing everybody together. The theme of today, really, the system operate way of working that we are taking forward, which gives the opportunity to really look at the patient across that whole pathway, rather than necessarily just looking at individual parts of it separately. So although it's difficult, it's challenging, we are actually really excited about the work we're doing around recovery, And the coming together, the system orientation that we now have gives us the opportunities to do that in a very different way to anything that was possible in the past. I'll stop at that point, David, and hand on.
Thanks very much, Paul. Mish, welcome. Over to you for the workforce.
Thank you, and thanks everyone. So I'm Mish Irvine, I'm the ICS Director of People, and I'll be talking to you today on behalf of our Chief People Officers, our workforce community and our clinical education leads, to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've done over the past year. First of all, in terms of the context that we're working in, you will have seen on the news and also from national correspondence that we have had the National Workforce Plan that's been published, and I'll talk a little bit about that in this presentation. There's a lot of really positive stuff in there about the training and the education and the reform that we need to put in place to get us the workforce supply that we need. And we as a system need to respond to that appropriately for our local population. Delivering people services at scale. So we're considering collectively how we'll be able to be more efficient and effective in the way that we serve our people from a corporate perspective. Of course, you'll be familiar and aware of the medical pay negotiations and the strike action, of course, that we are combating on a daily basis, it feels at the moment. The funding and financial challenges, I think Paul's covered off really well. And the Hewitt report, of course, is something that we're considering as an overall in terms of how we enact our services as an ICB. Our local context, all of it's very similar. Our workforce supply and our future pipeline does remain our absolute priority. We need to ensure that our vacancies go down, our turnover goes down, and our sickness remains low. So if we go to the next slide, I'll be able to talk to you a little bit about how we're doing this. So all the way through the presentation today, you will have heard the word collaborative, and the way that we do work as a people function across the whole is incredibly collaborative. It's a distributed leadership approach. So in terms of the support to the portfolios that Peter described, we have 6 pillars for workforce. All of those are led individually by one of the Chief People Officers from the NHS trusts. Underneath those, we have working groups that are serviced by workforce, clinical and other wider colleagues from HEIs and colleges, but also don't just cover the NHS organisations. We have significant representation from our social care partners, both local authorities and also our voluntary sector providers as well. So what we're doing in all of these areas is to come up together and be collaborative in our approach. And sometimes that requires a lot of negotiation. We've had to learn to understand how each other work, see things from different perspectives and be quite creative in terms of some of the solutions that we're coming up with together. In terms of our achievements, then, if we go to the next slide, this is a really positive slide, and it really does talk about what we've done in year. Phil has mentioned our People Hub, so that's fundamentally a system bank that we pulled together for the COVID response initially. But since then, we've adapted that model, and now we have the People Hub colleagues working really flexibly for our overall system instead of using agency. So actually, what we're doing is reducing the cost, but we're also reaching out to our community and offering opportunities for people from lots of different walks of life. We've got people from young people, from schools and colleges. We've got individuals that want a career change, that they will be new to care. And we're also reaching into our seldom heard communities as well. And they're working as reserves or they're working as companions, so volunteers within our community. So helping us in times of surge, but also helping themselves in terms of their career development. And really there's a lot on here, but I think I wanted to really focus on our outreach work in terms of speaking to you today. We have got a journey to work, and there's 3 pillars to that. So one of them is around schools and colleges and trying to develop how we can create the interest for our roles, both in health and social care. So describing from a really young age, so age 5, all the way up to kind of GCSE A-level stage, what the opportunities are, reaching into colleges, supporting them with their pathway planning, their career planning, but also their lessons, and then linking that into our virtual work experience offer, which you can see here. There's been 1,000 just in year individuals that have been through that. And in times of COVID, and also with some of the age restrictions NHS organisations quite rightly have for young people, it's been a really, really good way for them to get a taste of what it is to work with us, also in a safe environment, which can then lead to personal work experience and developing apprenticeships or T-levels. So it's been really beneficial. And we have done a lot of work around workforce planning as well, productivity, trying to find ways to work more collaboratively across the system, and create new roles. So some of those entry-level roles and system-wide apprenticeships, system-wide roles where there's rotation, so that they can see what it is to work across the county and the different health and care organisations, but then choose the right career pathway for them. So if we go to the next slide, I'll be able to just outline to you briefly the long-term workforce plan. Now, understand that is a very busy slide. That's 150 pages condensed from the national view in terms of what it is that we need to deliver as a nation in the next 15 years to ensure that we have the right workforce supply. For us, of course, we need to make this real for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. So what we're doing is we're actually having a summit in a couple of weeks' time with all of our workforce and clinical leaders to try and really look at our workforce planning. So what are for the next 5 years, what are our real shortage professions? What do we need to do to really train the right number of people? How do we link with our HEIs to make sure that we have the right courses? How do we reach out into our communities even more so we get people that want to do these careers, that understand what those careers are, but also, of course, are representative of the community that we live in. So we're much more inclusive and we challenge ourselves a lot more on that. In terms of retention, this has been a huge focus area for us, and we have managed to keep our turnover relatively stable. So 10% at the moment, which is, you know, the national average. It isn't higher than that, but we need that to reduce significantly down. We've got a lot of really highly skilled professionals that work for us, and we need to offer them opportunities to support them to stay in work, whether they're young people that have got families and they want to work more flexibly. They're older people that are at the end of their careers and they're actually thinking about, what can I do now? I don't want to do this job. I want to do something slightly different. So what we've done is invested in retention coordinators that sit in each of the sectors. They've met directly with our workforce and we are offering solutions to them now that have come from them. And what we're doing is changing the way we think rather than the other way around. So actually we've got to be more flexible and we've got to adapt. The reform column is really significant for us. We have to have different roles. We have to have more exciting opportunities, and we need to think differently from a cost perspective as well in terms of how we deliver our care. We need to be over organisational boundaries. We need to offer apprenticeships, T-levels, so that we can actually encourage a real retention over the life cycle of individuals for their roles. People want to do lots of different things now, not just the traditional careers. We need to be much more innovative around digital. So that's something that, again, with the virtual work experience, we're expanding on. And reform from a people services perspective is key as well. Efficiency, being effective, but also being really engaging in the way that we do that, because our workforce are absolutely key to us in every directorate. And we need to make sure that we take everyone along with us on this journey. So the next slide, please, Dan. In terms of our kind of current and future programme focus, so I've covered a lot of this in terms of the summit and the long-term workforce plan. Our well-being of our workforce is massively important to us, and you may have seen on the achievement slide that we've had a really significant number of referrals to our wellbeing hub, and we've had a wellbeing week as well this year. So we're listening and we're hearing from our workforce about what actually they need to be happy and have that kind of employee value proposition approach, so that we're again listening to them rather than the other way around. What we're really keen to do is to give you some kind of real life examples of the work we've done. So I'm going to ask Dan in a minute to play Asuda's story. Now, Asuda is a refugee that lives locally. She's been through some real hardship to get to the place that she's in now. She's actually graduated from our system-wide apprenticeship for healthcare assistants, and she's moved on to the next one. So our pharmacy tech apprenticeship, for her to then begin her career as a pharmacist. So I will let Asuda speak for herself. Thanks, Dan.
Hello, my name is Asuda Zarqam and I'm a healthcare. I came from abroad as a refugee to study, and I found this apprenticeship, and I studied healthcare apprenticeship, which helped me to learn a lot about the culture, about the environment, and especially one of the things is because they sent me to different placement. We just learn a lots of things and see a lots of different people, and I had a chance to talk to a lots of people about different things, and I think that was a plus for me. I love to help people. Is just that something with me as a kid. I feel like it's mostly with me. When I'm helping someone, it helps me, makes me happy. And I feel like, okay, I'd be useful at the end of this day. Like when I go to bed, I'm like, oh, I've done this. I helped someone. I make someone smile, and it's just put one pain away. That is all for me. That's all I need. Well, it was really nice. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, I have to work and study because I was able to talk to people and learn about the stories and what to do. And you don't think about the small things. As you look at the apprenticeship, you feel like, okay, I'm going to study. I'm going to go pass some exams and I learn some jobs and I'm going to fill some form and that's it. No, it helps you with going into social life and learn about lots of skills that's going to help you in the future in a life that you never think about. It's just a small thing that help you, and it's at the end you feel like you have a family as well. This is always support you, and you know, like you've done something, and I really loved and enjoyed it. Well, I finished my apprenticeship, my contract's finished. Now I'm working as a bank healthcare, and I applied for a pharmacy apprenticeship, and I was love to know about medicines and how to use them to improve health, which I apply in that, and my course is gonna start in September, which I cannot wait for it. I'm gonna say go for it. Sometimes it's gonna look hard and it might gonna scare you about the job, but as soon as you go for it, like when you start, you feel like you know everything. It's just comes with a plan. It's just with a flow. You learn a lot, you get a lot of knowledge, and it's just amazing.
So thank you very much. I'll hand over to Becky now.
Thank you very much, Mish. And thank you. It's quite inspiring, isn't it, seeing that kind of feedback and how thinking differently can make such a big difference to individuals. I'm Becky Scullion. I'm Director of Nursing within the ICB. And I thought it would be helpful if we started to focus upon our vision, which demonstrates the commitment within our organisation and the wider ICS to ensure quality is at the centre of everything we do, and that the care within Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent is safe, effective, inclusive, and of the highest standard possible. Those are where we wish to be. Those are the ambition that we've set ourselves. If we move on to the next one, Sarah, the next one, Dan. Thank you. It is an old mantra, isn't it, that quality is a golden thread that runs through every aspect of care. And we've worked really hard over the last 12 months to continue to develop those really positive collaborative relationships, which we've all talked about with the ICS partners, with providers, agencies, such as police and the fire rescue. And most important for us is our citizens. This underpins all of our ambition to be an organisation and a system that empowers and listens to people using their insights and experience to continuously improve our services. One of our key statutory duties is safeguarding, and safeguarding those who are vulnerable within our communities. We've got a number of forums and processes which support a multidisciplinary approach to safeguarding and continue to work collectively to support our citizens to live free from harm, neglect and abuse. Key to all of this is a systematic quality assurance structure, which is the bedrock of our commitment to safety. It ensures that concerns and risks are not only identified, but also addressed promptly and transparently. Embedding that culture of empowerment for both patients and staff is key to our success. We only have to look at the recent events in light of the outcome of Lucy Letby's trial to understand how important it is to give people the freedom to speak up. It enables us to build upon those foundations of a patient safety culture and system. The work we've undertaken just recently, which is to roll out the patient safety incident response framework, quite a mouthful, has made us regional front runners. We are absolutely at the front of everything that we do in terms of that. And I think we've been recognised for our dedication for patient safety as a result of the work and the dedication that's been undertaken from the team and from others within the ICS to be able to support us to move that one forward. Dan, can we go to the next one, please? It's always helpful, I think, to look back at what we've achieved, because so often you just look forward and just the mountains that we need to continue to climb. Some of the things that I think we are especially proud of and especially happy that we've managed to embed some of these things in are around the robust governance framework, which we've worked collectively together, and that supports our ongoing focus upon the system-wide approach to assurance and safety. Maternity and neonatal care, which all of you will know, has been subject to national and local scrutiny, with the expectation that all services are embedded changes to align to those findings within the Ockenden report. We're proud to have led the way in developing the maternity Opal plan, which is poised to benefit the entire region, and to be one of the first areas to pilot the introduction of the maternity and neonatal independent senior advocate, who's helping parents to be, right now, new parents and families to have a voice, to be heard and to be listened to, which is a critical part of the recommendations that Donna Ockenden pulled forward. We've just heard from Mish about the importance of our workforce and maintaining that professional and clinical standard, and how that is central to the ambition to achieve excellence across all aspects of care. The ICB nursing team have been nominated for a national award for their innovative approach to returning nurses into practice, with the ICB supporting for 14 nurses that were currently within our corporate structure to undertake training, education and clinical monitoring, and they're now actively undertaking shifts within our hospitals and community services. We've also participated with the future development of paramedics, supporting them to make connections across the UEC system in particular, and knowing the surge and the issues and the pressures that we've got, you can see how fundamentally that will help to support a smoother pathway and ensure that patients get to where they need to be. I think from sort of the discussions and the reflections that we've had from each and every one of the speakers today, you can see that the last 12 months have been challenging, but they've also been equally rewarding, because we continue to work collectively to achieving that optimum patient outcome through the excellence and innovation of our care services. I'm going to stop there, and I think I'm handing back to you now, David.
Becky, thanks very much, and thanks to the team for the presentations. At the beginning of the meeting, I referred to the VCSE sector and alliance, and the ICB signed that alliance a year ago, and that'll lead to closer working with such an important part of our system, and we are really blessed with the strength of that sector across our geographical area. What I'd like to do now is to ask Dan to play a video that describes that work and showcases it at tonight's AGM.
So VAST is the local infrastructure organisation for the voluntary sector across Stoke-on-Trent. So we support voluntary sector organisations so that they can provide support to their beneficiaries, and we do that through lots of different ways, providing direct support around governance, finance, funding, but also practical support and supporting them to get their voice heard with statutory organisations.
Support Staffordshire is the local infrastructure organisation for voluntary organisations in Staffordshire, and we support our member organisations in all the same ways that VAST do, and we work very closely with VAST. So Support Staffordshire and VAST, working together over the last 2 years, have set up the VCSE Alliance for Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. And the whole idea of those forums is to bring together the parts of the voluntary sector that's really interested and engaged in health and care in its broadest sense, to give them a voice, to let them input into plans, strategies, policies, clinical pathways, but also it's a kind of think and do tank. So those places where organisations can come together to collaborate.
Volunteering is there to provide added value and to supplement the work that's doing. It's about people being there to listen and to care for people when the paid staff haven't necessarily got the time to do that.
So sometimes perhaps assume that voluntary might mean amateur, which isn't the case at all. The quality can be just as good in the voluntary sector as in the NHS.
I was introduced through Support Staffordshire, and I've been volunteering in one way or another towards health benefits in lots of ways over the last 12-15 years. There are multiple areas of benefit to patients and also to carers and to the public alike. I think I would see 24-hour crisis online and phone accessibility to patients and to carers as something that the NHS isn't currently able to provide, and organisations like Samaritans, Silverline, Childline are obviously there and extremely able and willing to provide that sort of first port of call. I think really the idea would be, and the ideal is, the reciprocity of all three sectors working together with a view to people being able to leave behind a label which they may feel they've become, and to rediscover themselves as a valid and interesting contributor to the social society that we have today. I've been able to feel as though I'm not quite in the sidings and rusting at my older adult qualification time. So I'm grateful, and thank you to volunteering.
So as an alliance, we've come up with 4 priorities to work with the voluntary sector and the ICS.
First is commissioning and funding, how the NHS and partners work with the sector to ensure more resources can flow into the voluntary sector where that's appropriate.
And the second priority is volunteering. That's about ensuring that people can take part in volunteering and there are good quality volunteering opportunities within health and care settings.
Number 3 is communications and engagement. So that's about working with the whole of the voluntary sector to have really good communications about opportunities, about policies, about changes that are happening in health and care, and also working with those organisations to reach the people that they work with, sometimes perhaps referred to as seldom heard.
The final priority is social prescribing and prevention. And by that, we will be working across all of the portfolios in the integrated care system to make sure that everything the voluntary sector is doing is embedded within all the health and care environment.
Thanks to Lisa and Gary and the team for pulling that together, which I think is a superb initiative and a superb film, especially the cameo there where the lady was giving the description of the impact on her of volunteering. What we'd now like to do is to move into the final presentational piece for this AGM, and there's a slight change on the agenda. We had hoped that Paul Edmondson-Jones would be able to join us, our Deputy Chief Executive and Chief Medical Officer. Paul has been called away and is now unable to attend, but I'm pleased to say that our Chief Executive, Peter Axon, is going to step in and fill that space. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, David, and hopefully I'll be able to do Paul's slides. Just if we can move to the next slide, please, Dan. So there are two statutory elements to our ICP, as we call it, our Integrated Care Partnership. So firstly, that is the Integrated Care Partnership itself, so the group. And secondly, the creation of an Integrated Care Partnership strategy, a document. Both are now in existence and have been for a number of months, and I'm really pleased to say that the ICP group partnership itself is well represented. So on average, we have well over, I would say, 30 members that attend on a quarterly basis, and I'll describe in a second some of the work that ICP group have been doing over the last year or so. Dan, next slide, please. So the ICP strategy itself is, I suppose I would describe it as the pinnacle of our planning and delivery cycle. So the ICP strategy, albeit it's a long-term document, so a 3 to 5 year document, it needs augmenting essentially with detail beneath that describes the how we will deliver the ambitions that sit within that Integrated Care Partnership strategy. And you can see in front of you a description of two documents that essentially achieve that. Something called our Joint Forward Plan, which is also now published and was published earlier this year, and our Operational Plan, which is an annual document that each year for the 1st of April we will refresh. So having all of those three things together essentially creates an understanding of the what it is we want to achieve, what our medium to long-term ambitions are, and how we'll achieve that, both in terms of within the Joint Forward Plan and description of, if you like, the vehicles that we'll build, develop and operate, and then the very granular operational plan that describes the nuts and bolts on the ground, if you like, the work that we'll do with system partners and across system partners and the population to deliver on those ambitions. Next slide, please, Dan. This is another representation of how we look at our ambitions, look at our responsibilities and opportunities within the Integrated Care Partnership document. So we describe this as the life course, and you can see that there are 5 key stages that we describe within the Integrated Care Partnership strategy that we then use within the portfolio narrative, the portfolio structure that I and others described earlier on, to determine precisely how we will positively impact on each of these age groups. Now, of course, some subject matters span the entirety of all ages. So mental health and well-being, for example, is perhaps, as I say, an example of that. But other aspects and portfolios are very specifically focused. So, of course, children and young people and maternity as a portfolio is a good example, and quite an obvious example of a portfolio that specifically focuses on one aspect of the life course that you can see in front of you. But it's an important way really to reflect on and understand the different needs of the population at different times in their life. Next slide, please, Dan. We also have another way, a sort of method of understanding need and addressing it within the strategy, and that is described as the 5 Ps, and you can see them in front of you. Perhaps the one for me that stands out in that list is the one at the top, people and communities. And an evolving piece within the integrated care system is how we develop our neighbourhood agenda. That's referred to within our joint forward plan and to a lesser extent within the integrated care partnership. But that essentially goes to the point that a lot of what we do and how we do it should be built from the bottom up, from the grassroots up, and our local populations. And in that regard, I'm perhaps referring to district and borough scale populations. Our local populations have very bespoke need, very specific ability to access services, and different gaps in health outcomes across Staffordshire. So we absolutely understand the importance of making sure that over time we continue to improve our focus on and through that neighbourhood lens, and things such as population health management, high quality use of data, joined up data across organisations is a really important way to be able to understand where those gaps are in terms of need, quality of outcomes and service provision at that localised level. Next slide, please, Dan. So through the integrated care partnership groups and meetings, as I say, that meet on a quarterly basis, what we've looked to do is to do something that we call deep dive. So that is essentially go quite a way into one key, and if we've got time, 2 key topics in each of those quarterly sessions. And you can see the description in front of you of the deep dive that we did in June of this year. And what that does is 2 things. Because of the diverse group that we have in the ICP meetings, it brings together a variety of thoughts, a variety of perspectives, and unearths occasionally things that perhaps we hadn't thought about in our day-to-day activities and work that we do. The ICP group is also, for me, as much an organisational development piece, and it brings together system partners to build, improve those high quality relationships, which is very much at the centre of what integrated care systems are all about. If we move to the next slide, Dan, I think it describes the September session. Yes, so you can see the work that we did in the September session. I have to say, the topics do create quite passionate, focused, exciting conversations. And of course, the key is to make sure that, I suppose, they're not just talking shops. So as much as the organisational development benefit that I described a moment ago is really important, what's equally important is that we take actions from those integrated care partnership meetings and make sure that we embed next steps and focus our portfolios on whatever those outputs, those next steps and actions are. So for me, they're a fantastic source of, as I say, improvement opportunity, the ICP meetings, but also that opportunity to be able to build relationships across various stakeholders. Next slide, please, Dan. And just a look ahead in terms of what the ICP meetings are looking to achieve. So what we've agreed is that across our partners is that we'll focus 2 of the partnership meetings a year on our strategy, so a mid-year review of progress against our strategy, and then a year start or just prior to the start of the financial year, a March discussion about the fit for purpose nature of the existing strategy. So is it still pointing in the right direction? And then the other 2 quarterly sessions will look to do deep dives, as I described a moment ago. Something I forgot to mention was that what we're looking to do is to do the deep dives through that life course period and categories that I presented a moment ago. So you can see that in September we had the conversation around the start well piece, maternity through to children of aged 5, and the intention in the December conversation is to have a conversation around the next age cohort, which is that the grow well category, etc, etc, etc. Okay, next slide, please, Dan. I think we're getting there. So the fundamental point being that the coming together of a variety of partners, all that have some impact on the outcomes that the population experience, creates a synergistic environment. It's worth more than the individual sum of its parts put together. And that's achieved through that ability to be able to bring fundamentally different perspectives into the room, but focus those perspectives on one fundamental point: the improvement in the experience, the improvement in the outcomes for our population. So it's a really exciting piece, and a massive thank you to Paul Edmondson-Jones, who, as I say, couldn't unfortunately be here today, and the team behind the scenes that pulled together the ICP strategy in the first place, but then drive forward it and its delivery through the various portfolios and other mechanisms that we've got. Dan, next slide. That may have been the last one. Yes, back to you, David.
Peter, thanks very much, and thanks to everybody for those presentations. And it is the question and answer open session. What I'd like to do, Susan, if you just hold your question for a moment, I'm just going to ask Tracy Shewan to come onto the screen. There she is. Hi, Tracy. To go through any questions that we've had submitted in advance, and then I'll come to you, Susan, and anybody else who wants to raise a question. And it might be good if we just got members of the team that have done the presentations on the screen now. So if I could just ask you to come onto the screen, and we can probably take the slide down now. People will raise their hands in due course. Tracy, so if we could deal with the questions we may have received in advance.
Thank you, Chair. And this question was asked at the ICB board, but I note Mr. Jones is in the audience this afternoon, where he wasn't earlier on at the ICB board, so I think it's pertinent we ask his question again and an answer to him while he is actually here. We are in dialogue with Mr. Jones, and I'm more than happy to talk to him afterwards, and I am attending Moreland's PPG's meetings in November. However, he asks this question: when changes are made to service provision, how is their impact assessed relative to your mandated and statutory obligations? For example, one of your statutory obligations is to tackle inequalities in outcomes, experience and access. If any proposed changes result in significant reduction in access by a particular community, then what level of change would be allowed, and how will that community be involved and or notified?
Okay. Chris, Chris is going to take that, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Chair. More than happy to repeat the answer I gave at board earlier. So service change, as we know, can take many different forms, but generally speaking, I think for the purpose of this question, we say it's either a change to the range of services that are available or the geographical location that the service is delivered from. In either event, the service change process follows a very structured methodology underpinned by national guidance. So that would include outlining the case for change, clinical oversight, and an assessment of the impact on patients or communities who may be accessing those services now and into the future. Depending on the scale of the proposed change, we may well be working alongside local government scrutiny colleagues or NHS England, and we may well have to conduct a more formal consultation with the public, but we'd expect all service change proposals really to be co-produced with patients, or at the very least be influenced by input from those people who use the service. So I've got lived experience of using that services. As the question suggests, ICBs, sorry, get me plosives in the right order, are required to comply with statutory guidelines, so the Equality Act 2010, for example, or as in this case, in relation to health inequalities. And we do that through mechanisms such as the Quality Impact Assessment, Equality Impact Assessment, and where there are issues identified through those processes, we are required to give regard to them and bring forward options on how those impacts can be mitigated. So I'll pause there, Chair, but hopefully that's a reasonably fulsome answer.
Thanks very much, Chris. Tracy, any further questions that have been submitted in advance?
There is a question from Malcolm Barber, and thank you for Malcolm has clarified his question earlier on when there were some questions about his question. Unfortunately, Paul Edmondson-Jones isn't here and has offered to give a written response, but I'll read out his question in the matter of fullness anyway. It is a great concern that the diabetes care and prevention has deteriorated since the formation of the ICB. Even though Staffordshire is the worst area for diabetes in the UK, he believes, is it possible to furnish the facts and figures to this meeting on the day or in advance? And I know Paul will do that. He had got it ready for today, but has been unable to attend, so he has said he will give it in writing to him. But
Okay,
I think
Jack,
a hand went up. Yeah.
Jack, do you want to make a comment in regard to that?
Yeah, no, thank you. So I had a communication with Paul Edmondson-Jones earlier just on this. So whilst it's not an area within it, one of my other roles is NHS England cardiovascular prevention lead, and I've raised this query at the regional and the diabetic network level. So the response I've me sort of earlier this afternoon. So whilst it's not directly with my portfolio, it obviously overlaps with cardiovascular. And the response I've had is that there's no concerns that have been raised on a diabetic network level with NHS England or regional level. And diabetes is one of the areas that's had the largest assurance requirements at NHS England. So the outcome of this, Tracy, is I'll carry the conversation on with the regional diabetes network and with Paul Edmondson-Jones just to look at the data, and we'll hopefully be able to answer that back in fullness. Thank you.
Jack, thank you very much. And Malcolm, thank you for the question. And David, thank you for the question. Tracy, any further questions in advance?
Well, Amanda has just raised something in the chat, but I recognise Susan had a had a hand up before that.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring Susan Finlow in to ask your question. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. I can't seem to see the word carer or the health of carers anywhere, even in the updated NHS Constitution, which was updated in August this year. I need to know what your plans are for people such as myself who are housebound carers regarding my health. I'll give you one example. They came to vaccinate the booster for my husband, but they refused to vaccinate me. Being housebound, I've done without. So what are your plans for people like myself?
Okay, so who'd like to take that? Peter?
I'm sure if Paul Edmondson-Jones was here, he'd have his hand would have shot up. So in his absence, I will attempt to answer. So I entirely understand the situation, and I think I also do fully appreciate the huge role and importance that carers play in the NHS across the country, and of course specifically in Staffordshire. So I suppose firstly and really importantly to say a massive thank you to all of those out there that care for a loved one or a friend. We had a presentation a few days ago from Lorna Clausen, one of our clinical leads and deputy medical director, who delved into data relating to the treatment of and journeys of our over 75 population, medical journeys of our over 75 population in Staffordshire, and some of that conversation heavily orientated around the importance of proactive support in communities. So some of which I referred to earlier, but very much making sure that we understand the needs of individuals, particularly the most vulnerable in society, and then tailor our service offer, our support offer, and that's not just ourselves as an NHS, but that's the wider integrated care partnership group, to the needs of those individuals and critically the households that those individuals exist within. Now, we're absolutely not there yet, but our ambition is to make sure that through that localization offer, that neighbourhood approach, we better understand needs of those that are most vulnerable in society, and we proactively support them. And that inevitably on occasions will mean proactively supporting those individuals that are wrapped around that are supporting them in their own right. So I absolutely appreciate that there is work to do. I apologise if the narrative in relation to the importance of carers doesn't come through as much as it should, and we'll absolutely take that away and address that. But I am reassured that the work that we're embarking on at neighbourhood level, the population health management work that we're doing, is very much focused on understanding the needs of households where the most vulnerable exist and proactively supporting them. So perhaps not the answer you would want in terms of what we're doing right here, right now, but I am assured that the work that we're embarking on and in terms of that localization piece is absolutely addressing.
Peter, as a minimum, could you at least authorise that carers with the housebound vulnerable can be vaccinated by the visiting people who are vaccinating us? Don't leave us without it.
Okay. That sounds very reasonable, but I'm conscious Paddy's got his hand up.
Peter, I'm going to bring Paddy in because Paddy, I'm sure, is going to give a response to that. Paddy.
Yes, I'm Paddy Hannigan. I'm a GP and I'm the clinical director for the primary care portfolio within the ICS. So it is a disappointing story. I mean, I think when somebody comes in to vaccinate one person in a household, it's just a matter of common sense to offer anybody else in the household who, particularly if they're housebound themselves, vaccination. So apologise for that, and that isn't best practice, and it's not something we would want to hear very often. This year's vaccination programme has got off to a complicated and faltering start, primarily because there was an intention to try and coordinate the flu and COVID vaccine programmes in a better fashion than we perhaps did last year. It would be a huge efficiency both for individuals and for the system if we gave both vaccines to most people at the same time. But it got off to a faltering start because that the changes were introduced at the last minute and caused some consternation amongst GPs who had already organised their flu programmes. It then changed again because of the emergence of this new COVID strain. So the program's been accelerated. So there's been a confusing start to the programme. I know most GPs do try and look at when they're going out to either care homes or individuals' homes to see if there's anybody else who might be vaccinated. But we know from anecdotes such as yours that doesn't always happen perfectly. So we don't need to authorise that because practices can do that already, but we can certainly pick that up through the vaccine programme and try and just impress upon colleagues that common sense should prevail.
And thanks, Paddy, for clarifying that, and that makes perfect sense, the way that you've described that. Tracy, is it on Susan's question that you wish to respond? Yeah.
Susan, with your permission, obviously you've registered for today, so if I can use your email to make contact with you, particularly on your issue, and I will take that offline and do so.
Thank you.
Susan, thank you once again for your question. Before I bring Ian in, Tracy, can we just deal with the chat? So the question in the chat, and then I'll bring Ian Simon.
Yes, there were two questions before Ian in the chat, so I'll take them in order in order to respect that. So
Great,
the first one is Amanda Griss, and it's, I've witnessed in August that no patients in SDEC at New Cross were seen by a doctor between 1 AM and 8 AM. All patients were kept sat there overnight. At 8 AM, the sister announced an apology and said patients would be seen in time order. Can you do anything to improve the care South Staffordshire patients get at New Cross? I feel it's a patient safety issue, and it wasn't a strike day either. So it may be Phil or Becky to pick up to take forward.
Okay, so Phil, you've got your hand up if you'd like to take that question.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the comment. And I was really sorry to read that in the chat there. So although obviously I can't go into the specific detail of a particular time period, what I can say is that the UEC urgent emergency care strategy and plan that we have as a system applies to our whole population, irrespective of what acute trust they are seen at, and part of that is very much about smoothing variation. And we see variation in terms of the times of day that people are discharged. We see variation in staffing levels at different times of day. And all of this can lead to further pressures in the system, essentially. So one of the key bits of work that we're doing at the moment is about smoothing that variation, ensuring that we've got staffing levels to meet the demand that's there at a point in time, and ensuring that we're looking at that on the cycle of a day and on the cycle of a week to make sure we're not seeing disparity in service, be it weekends, weekdays, overnight or in the days. So I'm happy to take away the specific example and look into it, but hopefully that gives some reassurance in terms of the overall work that we're looking to do. And I think Becky may want to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Becky?
Thanks. I was just going to build on exactly what Phil said in terms of, sort of we will have conversations, obviously, with the clinical team and the quality team that's sitting over at RWT, just to understand exactly what goes on, and to also investigate whether or not this is a one-off, or if there is something that we do need to, sort of have further plans and understanding around what actually happens on that side. So I'll take that action away. Tracy, I'm not sure if you want to feed that back over to Amanda, I think it is, sort of once we've got a response back from RWT.
Yes, okay, yeah, and Amanda is probably still on the call, and like I say, we will have contact details that we can feed that back to following people registering here. And just one more question in the chat before we can move to Ian's question, David. So Diana Smith says her interest is in prevention, and specifically in what can be done to improve access to good food and reduce inequalities. I'm looking to what can be done to increase the production of high quality fruit and vegetables in the area. This may involve a combination of professional leadership and volunteers. The Kindling Trust in Stockport is a very good model for this. Who is the best person for me to talk to with regard to seeing what support the ICB could potentially offer to make this a reality? And Peter's put his hand up on that.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Dan. Peter.
Yes. Again, it was probably if Paul was here, he'd pop his hand up. So I'll step in. Great topic in that in terms of the prevention agenda, it's spot on. I would say that it's probably a multi-agency piece, that is, in that clearly the local authorities have a role and link in, as I would suggest do voluntary sector and services, so support Staffordshire and VAST. So in terms of a link into us, I would suggest it is probably one of Paul Edmondson-Jones's team. Now, which one precisely, we can find out. So perhaps, Tracy, if we could, again, obtain the details of the person asking the question. Apologies, I didn't catch the name. And we then relay the name through rather than me giving a name and it being the wrong one. But I'm sure there's somebody that we can relay, and then they can coordinate that wider conversation with other fellow agencies.
Yes, I can do that, David. Yeah. And I've put my email in the chat as well if people want to make direct contact.
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks, Becky, for the response to the previous question. Diana, thanks for your question as well. Ian, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Interesting meeting. You've come a long way in a very short time. You still got a long way to go, but I think you'll get there. Could I first thank Mish, her presentation, especially her Suda story, heartwarming for me. They're a refugee and mean something to me because I was one of 3 individuals who helped set up the Asylum Seeker Refugee Support Group in Stoke-on-Trent in the late 1990s. And it's really good that we get a positive story. Thank you for refugees that are willing to contribute and add to the values of local communities. Right, quickly, Chris is presentation. Improving population health is critical, understood. Housing, etc., is obviously key. But in your slide, Chris, section 117, I presume that's mental health aftercare. Is that correct? And could you give me a flavour of what you're looking at there? Because you're looking at the priorities, and then I've got quickly one on finance.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So yes, it is section 117 aftercare. So these are patients or service users whose care is arranged in that context. The conversation we're having at the place level is how both local authorities and the ICB can discharge their responsibilities for that particular patient cohort in a way that optimizes the capacity that we've got available in our system, but also then thinks through whether there are any commissioning gaps in relation to the services that are currently on offer and what more recent trends in terms of patient need is telling us, so that we can commission that service, and then we avoid kind of getting into more difficult conversations between the 2 funding agencies.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Thanks, Chris. Ian, please ask your finance question as well.
The question, I noticed earlier today, obviously, Paul was making a presentation on finances, and in fact, you know, the fact that it's highly unlikely you'll be breaking at the end of this fiscal year. What I noticed on Paul's presentation today was 24-25 will be extremely difficult. That was the statement on the slide. Now, it's not just going to be extremely difficult for the NHS, it's going to be extremely difficult for your other partners, the voluntary sector and the local authorities. Now, what is the collaboration level whereby you get early identification of problems within those other 2 sectors? Because we do know that Stoke-on-Trent City Council, for instance, have got significant problems at this moment in time with finances, and these are not likely to go away within the next couple of years.
Thanks, Ian. Paul?
You're right, Ian. It's extremely difficult across the whole of the public sector, and clearly we work very closely together. We have the people go through the health system, the same people go into the social care system. They are the same people. I mean, to answer your question, we have just as we've worked much more strongly as NHS partners in the past year, we are also working much more strongly, in my view, with our local authority partners too. So Peter, he's got his hand up, but Peter runs a fortnightly meeting of the chief executives that is regularly attended by the chief executives of the 2 upper tier councils. I meet regularly with the CFOs, and the conversation we've had and agree upon is that we need to look at it as a Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent pound across health and social care.
Okay.
And moving away from the days when literally legal disputes weren't in the past between NHS and local authorities. That will not happen. I'll use that word. It will not happen.
Good.
That is not the same thing as saying it's going to be easy to sort out, is it? It's going to be massively difficult. And when in a situation where one party had plenty of money, saying the other was in difficulty, I think we now have the mechanisms to support each other. It's much more difficult when both parties are short of cash. But what I can say, Ian, is that we will absolutely work to ensure that collectively we spend the money in the best way that we possibly can.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Peter, do you want to add to what Paul said?
Yeah. So just very briefly, Ian, there's also something about personal relationships here, appropriate personal relationships, of course. But I've got a huge amount of time for John Rouse. I think he is a fantastic individual in terms of values and behaviours, as much as his professional credibility, and we are close, as we are, of course, to other CEOs across the patch, but those relationships are critical when times are very difficult. That's really when the benefit of building those relationships comes into play and is tested. And I'm proud to say, I suppose, that across the CEO group and other professional groups, so Paul with his chief finance officer colleagues, etc., those relationships are still intact and in a decent place, although it is really, really challenging at the moment, as you've described, Ian. And I think that will stay as well. But that's only because of the foundations that, we've built in relationship terms, which is really important.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, just to build on that, Peter, the chairs network and the network with the leaders of Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire County Council is very, very strong as well. I meet with both of those individuals on a monthly basis. And of course, we are tripartite chairs of the Integrated Care Partnership. Ian, thank you for your questions. Is there anything else, Ian, you want to raise this afternoon?
No, thank you very much. Wonderful meeting.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for your support. OK, can I just check, Tracy, have we any further questions in the chat that we need to address?
We do, and we've had a lovely sort of picture put in there by David, who's a volunteer, so it's a bit back at you, David, and thank you for all that you do there in the chat. So Carissa has raised, the work being done is brilliant, and I'm grateful to be able to see how far things are coming and the plan for next year. Is there a way for charities that offer clinical assessments for autism, for example, to work alongside the board to assist with decreasing waiting lists? Separately, I'm a disabled young adult and also a carer. I'll be happy to share my experience as part of any consultation that may take place, particularly those around mental health and joined up approaches in the area. So on that second part, David, that's for me to follow up, and Carissa, I will do that, and my email's in the chat, so please feel free to talk to me on that one. But I don't know if anyone wants to pick up the bit about the charities and autism.
Okay, Chris. Thanks, Tracy.
Yes, I can pick that up, and thank you, Clarissa. That's a very kind offer. I think we do have commissioned services for our autism diagnosis through our NHS trusts, but it is also true to say that we do have a degree of variation in the waiting lists, and that for some patients they are waiting longer than we would like. So I think I'd like to give that a cautious welcome, if I may, and the note of caution is just to signify that, of course, when we do get into diagnostic services, we need to make sure that the providers of those services have appropriate kind of clinical governance arrangements in place. But I think we could certainly follow up with a conversation outside of here, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the question. Tracy, any further points?
There's nothing further, just thank yous and apologies that Susan had to go, and that's it then.
Okay, so just check with our audience if there's any other points anybody wants to raise with the team tonight. Tracy has put an email address in the chat. If anything, you want to raise anything following the meeting, please do so. All feedback is important feedback. So what I'd like to do, just in closing the annual general meeting tonight, is to thank everybody who's joined us today to come and give this time and join with us on our first AGM as an ICB ICS. You will have seen our annual reports possibly on the website. We have worked on a much more user-friendly summary of that, which is only, I think, Tracy, 3 or 4 pages long. And again, Tracy, I don't know whether it's possible just to pop into the chat, if it's not already there, navigation, just to get into that so people can see that in summary. Obviously, the full documents are there for you to peruse should you so wish. So with that said, Thank you once again, everybody, and we'll draw the meeting to a close. Have a good evening.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.